What happens when a man is found dead in an empty London house with no wound, no weapon, and a single word scrawled in blood on the wall? RACHE. Revenge. This is the case that introduces the world to the legendary Sherlock Holmes, a brilliant, eccentric detective who sees what others miss. But beneath the fog of Victorian London lies a darker story, born 20 years earlier in the brutal desert of the American West. A story of love, betrayal, and a hunter named Jefferson Hope who will cross 2 continents and sacrifice everything for one thing: vengeance. From the salt flats of Utah to the gaslit streets of London, this is the tale of a crime so personal, so passionate, it could only be called a study in Scarlet. Join us as we unravel every twist, every clue, and every secret of Arthur Conan Doyle's masterpiece. If you love mysteries that grip your soul and detectives who see the invisible, this video is for you. Hit that like button to help others discover this classic tale. Drop a comment below, who is your favorite literary detective? And subscribe now for more timeless stories, because the game is afoot. A Study in Scarlet by Arthur Conan Doyle. A Sherlock Holmes mystery. 20 years of hate. 2 pills. 1 choice. The ultimate revenge begins now. A Study in Scarlet. In the year 1878, Dr. John Watson, having taken his medical degree in London, completed his army surgeon training and was sent to India. Before he could join his regiment, the Second Afghan War erupted. Wounded by a Giselle bullet at the Battle of Maiwand, he was saved by his orderly, Murray, only to be struck down by enteric fever in Peshawar. Broken in health, he was shipped back to England with his lungs ruined and his spirit low. With a meagre pension and no family, he drifted to London, that great cesspool of empire, and took lodgings in a Strand hotel, living aimlessly until his money began to disappear. Realizing he must cut expenses, he decided to find cheaper quarters. One day, standing at the Criterion bar, Watson heard a familiar voice. It was young Stamford, who had been a dresser under him at Bart's. Over lunch at the Holborn, Watson confessed he was looking for affordable rooms. Stamford mentioned a curious fellow at the chemical laboratory who also sought someone to share lodgings, a man named Sherlock Holmes. Stamford described him as brilliant but eccentric. He knew anatomy and chemistry, yet his studies were chaotic. He would sometimes beat cadavers in the dissecting room to observe post-mortem bruises, a bizarre habit that suggested a cold, scientific nature. Intrigued, Watson agreed to meet him. They found Holmes in the hospital laboratory, bent over a table. As they entered, he cried out in delight. He had discovered a reagent that was precipitated only by hemoglobin, an infallible test for bloodstains. He seized Watson's sleeve and demonstrated the test with his own blood. Stamford introduced them, and Holmes immediately said, "You have been in Afghanistan, I perceive." Watson was thunderstruck. Holmes waved off the amazement, then proposed they share a suite at 221B, Baker Street. The rooms were perfect, the rent reasonable, and within days they had moved in. Watson soon discovered that Holmes was a man of extraordinary contradictions. He would lie on the sofa for days without speaking, then spring into furious energy, spending nights in the laboratory or wandering the lowest slums. He played the violin beautifully, but his knowledge was strangely lopsided. He knew nothing of literature or philosophy, yet possessed encyclopedic detail on poisons, sensational crimes, and British law. Watson, puzzled, jotted down a list of Holmes's abilities, and threw it into the fire. He sensed there was a method in this madness, but what was Holmes's profession? One morning Watson picked up a magazine article titled The Book of Life, which argued that a man could deduce a stranger's history from a single glance. Watson scoffed, until Holmes calmly revealed that he himself had written it. Holmes then explained his trade. He was the world's only consulting detective. When official detectives were baffled, they came to him, and he solved their cases with scientific reasoning. To prove his point, he deduced that a messenger approaching their door was a retired Marine sergeant, and the man, when he entered, confirmed it. Watson's admiration grew. A letter arrived from Inspector Gregson of Scotland Yard. A body had been found in an empty house at 3, Lauriston Gardens, off the Brixton Road, a well-dressed man named Enoch J. Idreber of Cleveland, Ohio, with no visible wound, but blood on the floor. Gregson begged Holmes to come. Holmes, though lazy by nature, felt the thrill of the chase. Within minutes he and Watson were in a hansom, racing through the foggy London streets. At the house they were met by Gregson and his rival, Lestrade. The scene was grim. In the bare room lay Drebber's body, contorted, with a look of horror and hatred on his face. There were splashes of blood, but no wound. Lestrade, smug, pointed to the word RACHE scrawled in blood on the wall. "That means revenge," Holmes corrected quietly. Then, to the detective's irritation, Holmes began his own minute examination. He measured footprints, scrutinized the dust, sniffed the dead man's lips, and pocketed a small pile of grey ash. He announced that the murderer was a tall man, ruddy-faced, with square-toed boots, who smoked a Trichinopoly cigar, and that the murder had been done with poison. Gregson and Lestrade were incredulous. Back at Baker Street, Holmes explained to Watson how he had deduced the cab, the murderer's height, and the poison, from the stride length, the cigar ash, and the faint smell on Drebber's lips. He had also noted that the RACHE was written in a clumsy imitation of German script, a deliberate red herring. But a woman's wedding ring had fallen from the body, which suggested a love motive. To flush out the killer, Holmes placed an advertisement in the evening papers claiming a gold ring had been found near the crime scene. That evening, a decrepit old woman arrived to claim the ring. Holmes, suspicious, let her take it and then followed her. She led him on a wild chase through the streets, then vanished from a cab. It turned out she was a young man in disguise, an accomplice of the murderer. Holmes laughed at his own temporary defeat, but he now knew the killer was not working alone. Meanwhile, Gregson, confident he had solved the case, burst in with news. He had arrested Arthur Charpentier, the son of Drebber's landlady, based on a story of assault and a missing stick. Lestrade soon arrived, looking shaken. He reported a second murder. Joseph Stangerson, Drebber's secretary, had been stabbed to death in his room at Halliday's private hotel. Above his body, written in blood, was the word RACHE. The police were baffled. But Holmes noticed 2 pills on the windowsill. He took them, and at Baker Street he fed half of one to a sick terrier. Nothing happened. He cut the second pill, dissolved it, and gave it to the dog. The animal convulsed and died instantly. 1 pill was poison, the other harmless. Holmes now understood the method. Drebber and Stangerson had each been given a choice between 2 pills, one deadly, one safe, by a man who sought justice, not mere murder. Holmes then revealed the killer's identity, a cabman named Jefferson Hope. He had deduced it from the cab tracks, the footprints, and the fact that the murderer had used a cab to transport Drebber. Holmes had deployed his street Arabs, a gang of young boys, to search London's cab drivers. They found Hope. Holmes sent a message to his address, asking for a cab. When the driver appeared, Holmes calmly handcuffed him, introducing him as Jefferson Hope, the murderer of Drebber and Stangerson. A fierce struggle followed, but the police subdued him. At the station, Hope, calm and almost triumphant, explained that he was dying of an aortic aneurysm and wished to tell his story. He spoke of a life consumed by one purpose, revenge. 20 years earlier, in the desert of the American West, he had met a girl named Lucy Ferrier and her adoptive father, John Ferrier. They were rescued from starvation by a band of Mormons and brought to Salt Lake City. Ferrier prospered, and Lucy grew into a beautiful young woman. Hope, a hunter, fell in love with her, and she with him. But the Mormon elders had other plans. In the Mormon community, polygamy was doctrine. 2 elders, Drebber and Stangerson, wanted Lucy as a plural wife. John Ferrier, a non-believer, refused. Brigham Young himself gave them a month's grace. Ferrier and Lucy planned to escape with Hope, but the Danites, the secret avenging angels, watched their every move. One night Hope arrived and led them through the mountains. They nearly reached safety, but when Hope went hunting for food, he returned to find Ferrier murdered and buried, and Lucy gone. Lucy had been seized and forced to marry Drebber. Within a month she died of a broken heart. At her funeral, Hope stole the wedding ring from her finger, swearing that Drebber and Stangerson would die by his hand, and that ring would be the last thing Drebber ever saw. For years he tracked them across America and Europe, working as a miner, a laborer, always a step behind. Finally, In London, he became a cabman and discovered their lodging in Camberwell. Hope bided his time. One night Drebber, drunk, left his boarding house after a quarrel and hailed Hope's cab. Hope drove him to the empty house on Brixton Road, where he confronted Drebber, showed him Lucy's ring, and forced him to choose one of two pills. Drebber took the fatal one and died in agony. Hope then wrote RACHE on the wall to mislead the police, but in his excitement his nose bled, and he left traces. Later he realized he had dropped the ring, and when he returned to retrieve it, he encountered the police and pretended to be drunk. Hope still needed to deal with Stangerson. Learning that Stangerson was at Halliday's hotel, he climbed a ladder to his room at dawn. He gave him the same choice, but Stangerson attacked him, and Hope stabbed him in self-defense. With his mission complete, he continued cab work until Holmes's trap closed around him. Hope showed no remorse, he considered himself an instrument of justice. The next morning, before his trial, the aneurysm burst, and he was found dead in his cell, a placid smile on his face. Holmes later explained to Watson the precise chain of reasoning that had led him to Hope: the cab tracks, the footprints, the cigar ash, the poison pills, and the clever use of his street urchins. He showed how every detail, the German script, the ring, the accomplice, fitted into a logical whole. Watson marveled at his friend's genius. Holmes shrugged, saying the case was simplicity itself. He was already bored, looking for the next problem to sharpen his mind. The newspapers, however, gave full credit to Lestrade and Gregson. They hailed the capture as a triumph of Scotland Yard. Holmes laughed it off, he cared only for the intellectual puzzle. Watson, on the other hand, resolved to write the true account, preserving the facts and the brilliance of his companion. And so the strange tale of Jefferson Hope, the avenger of the Utah desert, came to an end, a scarlet thread of murder woven through the quiet streets of London. But the story did not truly end there. In the silent hours of Baker Street, Holmes would often pick up his violin and play melancholy airs, thinking of the vast American plains and the grim drama that had begun there. Watson, listening, understood that the past is never truly buried, it resurfaces in blood and vengeance, and only a sharp eye and a cool head can unravel its knots. The case also cemented the friendship between the two men. Watson, who had come to London as a broken soldier, now had purpose. He chronicled Holmes's exploits, and together they faced the foggy, dangerous world of Victorian crime. And though the public might never know the truth, Watson kept his journal, waiting for the day he would reveal the real story behind the study in Scarlet. Months later, when the excitement had died down, Holmes would occasionally refer to the case as an example of analytical reasoning. He would point out that the most bizarre details, the word on the wall, the ring, the pills, were not obstacles but signposts. Eliminate all other factors, he often said, and the one which remains must be the truth. Watson had learned that lesson well. In the backstory of the American West, the novel painted a stark picture of religious fanaticism and survival. The Mormon pioneers, driven from Illinois, carved a civilization from the desert, but their rigid laws crushed anyone who defied them. John Ferrier, the hardy prospector, and his adopted daughter Lucy became symbols of innocence crushed by power. Jefferson Hope, a man of action and passion, rose as a relentless force of retribution, a force that neither time nor distance could diminish. Hope's final confession, delivered calmly in the police station, moved even the hardened officers. There was no malice in his voice, only the satisfaction of a task completed. His death, so soon after, seemed almost merciful. He had lived for revenge, and once it was achieved, his body gave out. Dr. Watson, who had felt the aneurysm throbbing under his fingers, never forgot that moment. And so the case that began with a drunken American in an empty house ended with a corpse in a cell. The two detectives, Gregson and Lestrade, received praise and promotions. Sherlock Holmes received a new violin string and a fresh stock of tobacco. For him, the game was afoot. There would always be another mystery, another client, another chance to exercise that marvelous brain. For the reader, however, the story lingers, a tale of love and hatred, of deserts and London fog, of a man who sacrificed everything to right a wrong. It was Arthur Conan Doyle's first novel, and it introduced the world to the immortal Sherlock Holmes, the detective who could read a man's history in a speck of dust, and who, even in his earliest adventure, proved that justice, however twisted, will always leave its mark. Subscribe to Classic Book Summary so you don't miss the next book summary.